Do you know how many women live inside a man's mind long after she's gone? Not just in memory, not in his phone, his bed, or his inbox, but deep in the architecture of his psyche, buried in the dark corridors he rarely visits, where shame meets longing and the ego dares not tread. She's the woman who didn't just touch his heart, she exposed his shadow, and because of that, he cannot forget her. He may not say her name, he may not even know what she did to him, but her presence lingers like incense in a forgotten temple. She awakened something he wasn't ready to meet, himself. This is not about the loud, predictable women who demanded attention, not about the ones who tried to be everything to him. It's about her, the woman who didn't need to prove anything, who was willing to be misunderstood, who vanished at the exact moment he expected her to stay. She was still, she was silent, and that silence pierced deeper than 1,000 declarations of love. Carl Jung knew this archetype well, the anima, the feminine force that lives within every man, not the woman herself, but his projection of her. When a man meets a woman who reflects the part of himself he's denied, he becomes obsessed not with her body, but with the mirror she holds. She becomes the symbol of everything he wants and everything he fears. And when she leaves, he doesn't just lose her, he loses access to the part of himself she awakened. You may think he moved on. He didn't. You may think he forgot. He can't. The unconscious doesn't release what it hasn't resolved. And you, the woman who did nothing but choose herself, became the question he can't answer. It's always the woman who doesn't beg, who doesn't chase, who doesn't perform. She becomes unforgettable, not because she was the most giving, but because she was the most whole. She didn't orbit his needs, she stood in the center of hers. Elf. And when a woman does that, she speaks directly to the soul of a man, not his ego. That kind of presence is rare, and rare becomes sacred. He may never admit it, but in the quiet hours, when the world is asleep and the noise of validation fades, he remembers her. Not because she gave him everything, but because she gave him nothing he didn't earn. This woman understood one thing. She was never meant to complete him, only to reflect him. And reflection is dangerous when a man has not done his shadow work. She becomes too much, too intense, too still, too sovereign. And so he does what the unprepared always do. He retreats, rewrites, rejects. Something inside him remembers. When he sees another woman raise her voice, he remembers her silence. When someone new offers easy love, he remembers how she made him reach. When he feels control, he remembers the woman who wouldn't be held. The woman who haunts him is the one who didn't fight to stay. She didn't argue, she didn't collapse, she didn't convince. She simply withdrew her energy and watched the illusions burn. In doing so, she forced him to meet the places within himself he could no longer avoid. What makes a woman unforgettable is not how loud she loves, but how deeply she mirrors. She is the portal through which his unconscious confronts itself. That confrontation, if he's brave enough, becomes transformation. If he's not, it becomes obsession. And obsession is simply longing wrapped in fear. Her feminine energy wasn't the soft kind that comforted his wounds. It was the ancient kind, the kind that revealed them. She was both water and fire, serenity and storm, and most dangerously, she never needed him. Not for worth, not for rescue, not even for love. He may try to replace her, but how do you replace the one who introduced you to your own shadow? In his dreams, she returns, not as she was, but as the part of himself he abandoned, and every woman he touches after her must now compete with the one who required him to become whole. You see, when a woman detaches from the need to be chosen, she becomes unforgettable, not because she plays games, but because she is the game. She understands what most never will. A man doesn't fall in love with a woman's body. He falls in love with the way she makes him feel about himself when he's around her. And if that feeling was intensity, if that feeling was unfamiliar power, if that feeling was vulnerability dressed as danger, he will never unfeel it. She becomes the ache he mistakes for love, the void he tries to fill with distraction, the muse he tries to forget by naming her madness. But names are powerless against the woman who lives in the shadows, because she is formless, timeless, eternal. She is the feminine force that doesn't just inspire, she dismantles. And once dismantled, a man has only two choices: rebuild himself or repeat the pattern. And that is why he can't forget her. He can touch other women, he can even love them in fragments, but none of them will possess the same gravitational pull as the woman who touched his shadow, because what she awakened in him wasn't pleasure, it was presence. She made him feel himself in a way he never had before. Not the self he shows the world, not the curated man, the provider, the charmer, the stoic. She saw beneath all that, past the persona, into the raw, unguarded, trembling boy he locked away decades ago. And she did not flinch. That is why he remembers. Most people fall in love with comfort. He fell in love with a woman who was a threshold between what he was and what he was afraid to become. She didn't seduce him with promises. She didn't melt herself to match his desires. She stood at the edge of his unconscious, still and silent, like a goddess waiting at the gate. And instead of offering escape, she offered initiation. But initiation feels like death to the unprepared. Death of illusio. Death of ego. Death of the idea that love must be easy, soft, compliant. This woman was not soft. She was sacred. And sacredness is a burden for those who are not ready to bow. The feminine energy he tasted in her wasn't simply emotional or sensual, it was mythic. She carried the weight of centuries in her silence. She was the kind of woman a man could never fully own, because she didn't even fully belong to this world. She belonged to herself, to something ancient, to something spiritual, and yet she was right in front of him, smiling, soft-spoken, perhaps even tender. But that tenderness was never weak. It was the tenderness of a woman who has seen everything and still chooses to remain open. A woman who has walked through betrayal and didn't close. A woman who has faced abandonment and didn't chase. A woman who could hold love in her heart and still walk away without explanation. That kind of woman terrifies a man who has not mastered his own psyche, because she threatens to pull him into wholeness, and wholeness always requires surrender, not to her, but to himself. And surrender is the last thing the ego wants to do. So he resists, he projects, he labels her as cold, distant, complicated, even dangerous. Anything but what she truly is. A mirror. A spiritual mirror that reflects not just what he is, but what he is not yet. Some men run from this woman forever. Some try to replace her with 10 others. Some write poetry they never show, build empires just to prove they didn't need her, fill the silence with noise, distractions, control. But she remains, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a wound that wants to become a doorway, a soft echo that keeps returning, not to punish, but to remind him of what he could have become, if only he had stepped through. This is the irony of the feminine divine. She does not chase, she does not demand, she implies, and in her beingness she becomes the most haunting presence of all. She never needed to convince him of her worth. She was not fighting to be seen. She knew something most women forget, that real power doesn't beg, and sacred energy cannot be bargained with. You either rise to meet it or you watch it disappear. And when she disappeared, she didn't just leave the room, she left his unconscious. Her withdrawal became a vacuum, a dark pull that sucked everything false into question. And the truth, when it finally arrived, came with regret. Regret for not listening sooner. Regret for mistaking silence as absence. Regret for meeting a divine feminine force and treating her like a phase. Because by the time he realized what she was, it was too late. She had already alchemized the pain. She had already returned to her path. And while he still watched the world through the lens of longing, she walked barefoot into her own becoming, no longer waiting, no longer watching, no longer attached. You see, for a woman like this, attachment is death. She doesn't tether herself to men who cannot see. She may love deeply, she may ache in private, but she does not cling, because she knows the more she clings, the more she forgets who she is, and forgetting herself would be the only true loss. This is what makes her unforgettable, not just her presence, but her departure, the way she leaves with her head held high, soul intact, energy unscattered. She doesn't burn bridges, she disappears into silence, and that silence, that's where she lives now, not in his hands, but in the space between what he says and what he feels when he's alone. In the pause between his distractions, in the quiet before sleep, in the breath he didn't know he was holding until he remembers her. She becomes the woman he didn't understand in time, the one who didn't just touch his life, but rearrange the furniture in his soul. And once the soul is rearranged, nothing ever fun. It's the same. There is a particular ache that follows a man who has encountered a truly sovereign woman, not because she wounded him, but because she revealed him, and what she revealed can never be unseen. He may return to his old patterns, the familiar women, the performative roles, the shallow connections, but beneath it all, he knows. He saw something in her he couldn't find anywhere else. She didn't just occupy space in his life, she disrupted it. She didn't just offer love, she offered a mirror of wholeness, and wholeness to the fragmented self is unbearable. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And so this woman, this anima, this sacred mirror, becomes the symbol of fate for the man who refuses to awaken. She is not just a woman who came and left. She is the reminder of everything unlived within him. When she walked away, it wasn't out of cruelty. It was a sacred refusal, a refusal to be consumed by a man still addicted to his own smallness. She didn't leave to hurt him. She left because staying would have hurt her. A woman like this doesn't abandon people. She abandons illusions. She doesn't leave because she lacks emotion. She leaves because she refuses to perform for it. Her love is not a transaction, it is a frequency, and those who cannot rise to meet it will always mistake it for distance, when in truth it is depth. Many men spend years trying to understand what went wrong. They replay the final conversations, they dissect her last message, but they are asking the wrong question. It's not why did she leave, it's why couldn't I stay present with what she showed me. She didn't ask for too much, she only asked for truth. And truth is intolerable for the man still living in the armor of his ego. He wanted to be loved without being seen. He wanted devotion without vulnerability. He wanted closeness without reflection. But she was not capable of half-hearted intimacy. She is a vessel of depth, of meaning, of the kind of feminine power that demands inner death before rebirth. That is what he fears most, not her departure, but the part of himself he would have to kill to keep her. The lies, the performances, the fragile pride. You see, a woman who has done her shadow work becomes the test for every man still resisting his own, not because she wants to test him, but because her very presence shines light where he has only known darkness. And once light touches the unconscious, it begins to stir, restless, hungry, desperate. But what a man does with that hunger defines him. Does he numb it, or does he face it? Does he chase new distractions, or does he ask, what part of me am I still afraid to meet? She is unforgettable because she didn't give him answers, she gave him questions, and questions stay longer than kisses. She is unforgettable because she did not dilute herself to be loved. She let him taste her wholeness and then let him choose whether or not he could hold it. And when he couldn't, she didn't shrink. She simply stepped back into the sacred silence from which she came. A man never forgets the woman who lets him meet God and then disappears, because her absence doesn't feel like rejection, feels like loss of meaning. She carried with her the mystery, the ache, the divine chaos that can't be replicated. Other women may be beautiful, may be sweet, may even be easy, but she was never easy. She was truth dressed as woman, and truth is never comfortable. Men often say they want a real woman, a deep woman, a conscious woman, but when they meet one, they don't know what to do with her, because a conscious woman doesn't orbit their ego, shimo, vez from her own center. She doesn't fall into their stories, she invites them into their own mythos. And to accept that invitation, a man must be willing to die. Not literally, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. He must be willing to shed everything he built as armor and stand naked before himself. Few are ready, but all remember. Because once a man has seen his soul reflected in the eyes of a woman who has remembered her divine nature, he cannot go back to sleep. He can try, he can pretend, he can run, but she will live in the silence between his choices, in the stillness of his regret, in the tension between who he was and who he is still afraid to become. And one day, perhaps years later, He will sit in quiet and realize she wasn't just a woman. She was the moment his soul asked him to wake up, and he missed it. There comes a time, often too late, when the noise quiets, when success no longer excites, when bodies blur together, when even pleasure feels hollow, and in that silence he hears her. Not her voice, not her words, but the essence she carried, the way her energy moved through a room without needing to dominate it, the way her eyes didn't plead, they pierced, the way her love didn't chase, it challenged. She didn't just want his attention, she wanted his transcendence. But transcendence terrifies the modern man, raised in the cult of productivity and disconnected from his soul. He was taught to conquer, not connect, to provide, not penetrate emotionally, to protect, not be present. So when a woman stood in front of him and saw him, not as he pretended to be, but as he actually was, he froze. Because love that truly sees, without worship, without neediness, without distortion, is the most sacred and unsettling kind. She didn't fall for his mask. She fell into the space behind it. She wasn't seduced by charm. She was drawn to truth, and truth requires mutual nakedness. He wanted her light, but not the mirror she carried. He wanted her softness, but not the strength it came from. He wanted her soul, but only if it didn't challenge the stories he told about his own. And so she left, not out of bitterness, but alignment. The sacred feminine never lingers where there is no growth. She does not stay where her essence is consumed, but not honored, because she knows the cost of staying with a man who cannot meet her is her own dismemberment, and she has already buried too many versions of herself. That is what makes her different. She is not just the one that got away. She is the woman who refused to abandon herself to be loved. She has done her work. She has visited the basement of her psyche. She has held hands with her demons, comforted her younger self, wept in the arms of her own loneliness, and emerged, scarred but sovereign. And because of that, she knows what real love requires, and she refuses to offer it where only the performance of masculinity lives. For a woman like this, love is not possession. It is revelation. And if a man cannot offer his inner world, his rage, his shame, his grief, his fear, then he is not offering himself. He is offering a character, and she has no interest in loving characters. She wanted to touch his essence, not his image. She wanted to sit with the child in him who never felt enough, not the man who pretended to be too much. She wanted to love the parts he hides, the parts he only meets when no one's watching. But he mistook her intimacy for intrusion. He mistook her standards for control. He mistook her sovereignty for ego. And so she stepped away, not because he was weak, but because he was still asleep. And she made a vow, somewhere in the fire of her own awakening, that she would never again shrink to fit inside someone else's dream. This is what he will one day understand, that she didn't leave him. She left the illusion. And that is the difference between women who are forgettable and those who bend. Are formational. The former mold themselves to the needs of a man's surface, the latter reshape the very ground he walks on. She became unforgettable not because she was flawless, not because she was always kind or soft or gentle, but because she was real, and in her reality he saw the unlived dimensions of his own soul. And now he walks with a question he can never fully answer. Not why did she leave? Not did she love me? But what part of me couldn't receive what she offered? That question will follow him into new relationships, into older age, into moments of victory when the emptiness creeps back in, because she is the woman who taught him that depth exists and then vanished, not to punish, not to tease, but to return to her own sacred path. A path that does not orbit around whether or not she is remembered, because she doesn't need to be remembered. She knows who she is, and still, she is. In the brush of a woman's hair he passes on the street, in the smell of jasmine on an otherwise uneventful night, in the flicker of a song that sounds too much like the way she once looked at him. She exists now as a frequency, not a person, and you cannot forget a frequency. You either rise to meet it, or you spend your life chasing echoes of what you were too afraid to hold. She became the threshold between the man he was and the man he is still becoming. And though she is gone, her presence initiated him, not into comfort, but into consciousness. There are women who walk into a man's life and decorate it. And then there are women who undo it, who tear the curtains, shake the walls, and whisper truths into the foundation. She was the latter, not because she wanted to destroy what he had built, but because she knew that what he called home was actually a prison. He lived inside a self-image, polished, strategic, admired, a man of control, of goals, of crafts. Certainty, but control is brittle, and certainty is a liar. She touched him where he wasn't armored, and everything he thought made him strong began to crack. This is what the sacred feminine does. She doesn't flatter the ego, she undoes it, slowly, gently, or all at once, and what she leaves in its place is not weakness, but truth, a truth that burns away pretense and exposes the trembling, aching need beneath. That need is not for sex, not for approval, not even for love. That need is for union, not with her, but with his own unlived self. She was the bridge, but he didn't cross, because the bridge wasn't made of promises or praise, it was made of presence, silence, stillness. She waited in that stillness, holding nothing but her own light. She would not beg, would not bend, would not barter. She waited, as the divine feminine always does, for the soul to rise of its own accord, and when it didn't, she turned, without bitterness, without drama, without goodbye. Her absence was not loud, it was holy, the way a goddess withdraws her blessing from a temple gone hollow. From that moment on, nothing else fit, because once a man has stood at the edge of his own becoming, once he has felt the proximity of a woman who embodies everything he is not yet, every shallow thing he touches afterward tastes like dust. He may tell himself she was too much, he may pretend he dodged chaos, he may even convince others that he chose peace, but deep down, in that quiet place he doesn't show, he knows he didn't choose peace, he chose safety, and in doing so, he lost the one woman who would have never settled for his performance. He lost the mirror, and the mirror never returns. Not because she is unkind, but because she remembers who she is. There is a certain kind of woman whose departure teaches a man more than her presence ever could. She doesn't just leave behind a memory. She leaves behind a standard, a resonance, a blueprint of what real connection feels like. He may not have had the courage to receive it, but now he knows it exists. And once a man knows something exists, he can no longer pretend mediocrity is enough. She didn't need him to worship her. She needed him to see himself through her. But the eyes of truth are blinding when you've lived too long in shadow. And so he flinched, looked away, made her the problem, called her intensity too much, her clarity demanding, her silence cold. Projection is the ego's last defense, but she did not argue. She did not correct the narrative, because the woman who truly knows her worth does not chase after misunderstandings. She knows that what is seen through a distorted lens cannot be corrected by words. It can only be healed through transformation, and that is not her work to do. She did her work already. She loved him from her highest place, not from desperation, not from fear, but from wholeness, and that is the rarest love of all. Most love is born of need. Most love begs to be returned, but hers did not beg, hers offered, and when it was not received, she did not collapse. She simply closed the chapter and kept walking. And that walk, that silence, that steady reclaiming of her energy became the most powerful thing he's ever witnessed, because she didn't take anything with her. She left everything behind, except herself. And now he feels the weight of that absence, not because he lost a woman, but because he lost the version of himself he might have become through her. He feels it in the shallowness of new connections, in the soft betrayals of a life lived halfway, in the quiet moments when no one is watching and he wonders, what if I had chosen differently? But it's not really about her anymore. It's about him, because the woman he can't forget, the woman who lives in his shadow, was not just a partner, she was a portal, a moment in time when the universe handed him a key, not to her heart, but to his own soul. He didn't turn, and now he walks with that key in his hand, searching for a door that may never open again. There is a particular loneliness that follows a man who was once loved by a sovereign woman and could not rise to meet her. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the kind that lingers even in the arms of another. It's the quiet recognition that something sacred was offered and refused, that the moment passed, not because of fate, not because of timing, but because of fear. You see, her presence demanded more than just affection. It demanded transformation. And transformation isn't romantic, it's ruinous. It undoes a man before it remakes him. It strips him of the false identities he's worn for a lifetime, and she was willing to walk beside him through that storm, but only if he was brave enough to enter it. He wasn't, and now he lives in the ruins of what might have been. The woman who lives in his shadow is not just a symbol of lost love. She is the echo of the man he never became. She is every word he didn't say, every emotion he repressed, every truth he buried. She is the unlived life whispering through his ribs, not as punishment, but as invitation, an invitation he continues to ignore even as it haunts him. She is unforgettable, not because she made him feel good, but because she made him feel everything. And when you've lived numb for most of your life, even pain becomes sacred in the hands of a woman who knows how to hold it without judgment. That is what she offered him. Not comfort, but depth. But depth terrifies the man who hasn't learned to swim in his own waters. So he stayed on the shore, watching her disappear into the ocean, calling her too deep as if that were a flaw. It wasn't. It was an invitation to drown and be reborn. But she didn't wait. She never does. The sacred feminine does not linger in shallow waters. She walks alone, not because she prefers it, but because few can meet her in the place she now lives. A place beyond flattery, and games. Beyond projection. A place where souls speak louder than words, and where a man must bring his whole self, not just the parts that are easy to love. She is not the woman you find again. She is the one you remember when your soul starts to ache for more. She is the one you try to explain to the next woman, but the words never come out right, because how do you explain a thunderstorm to someone who's only ever felt the rain? And you, if you are the woman listening now, you may know this ache too well. You may have walked away from a man who couldn't see you, who called your wholeness intimidating, your silence passive, your power too much. You may have waited for him to rise, only to realize that waiting was wounding you, that loving him more than he loved truth was costing you your own soul. So you walked, not out of anger, but out of self-remembrance. And it hurt, didn't it, to love someone so deeply, to see their potential so clearly, and still have to leave. That is the heartbreak of the awakened woman, not being unloved, but being unseen, being misread by a man still stuck in his own fear, still attached to the version of love that doesn't require self-confrontation. You left, but your energy lingered. You became his initiation, not into romance, but into truth. A truth he may resist for years, but one day, in the middle of a conversation that doesn't satisfy him, or in the arms of a woman who can't see past his surface, he will feel it. That ache, that memory, that version of himself that was once possible with you, and it will break him open, not so he can come back, but so he can begin again. This is the power of the woman who does not wait to be chosen, who walks away when her spirit says go, who does not need to be explained, justified, or understood. She knows what she carries, and she knows that her love is not for the man who wants comfort. It's for the man who craves resurrection. So if you have been that woman or are becoming her now, remember this: he didn't forget you. He can't. Because you weren't just a chapter. You were the mirror. You were the question. You were the silence between his words that he still can't explain. You were the shadow that now walks beside him, not to torment, but to teach. And whether he ever learns the lesson or not is no longer your concern. You've already become the woman who remembers her worth. And a woman who remembers her worth doesn't ask to be unforgettable. She simply is. Now comes the final truth, both cruel and beautiful. He cannot forget her, not because she was flawless, but because she was free. And freedom is intoxicating to a man who is still shackled by his own fear. He tasted it in her eyes, in the way she didn't flinch when he pulled away, in the way she didn't beg to be loved. She offered herself fully, and still she could walk away. That kind of freedom cannot be undone. It echoes. He may go on to live a respectable life. Perhaps he marries someone who fits the mold. Perhaps he raises children, builds his empire, smiles in photographs. But somewhere, always somewhere, she remains. Not because she is waiting, not because she longs, but because she transformed him, whether he asked for it or not. And that transformation lives now as a scar and a guide, a subtle ache that appears in quiet moments, when the house is too still, when the conversation feels hollow, when he lies beside someone who doesn't challenge the edges of his soul. And you, the woman who lives in his shadow, you are not meant to wait for his understanding, because yours is a different path. Your power was never in being remembered, it was in being unavailable to the unworthy, in withholding your essence from men who only know how to take, and offering it only to those who see, fully, reverently, willingly. You are the test that many will fail, not because they are bad, but because they are not yet whole. And that is not your burden to carry. You were sent to awaken, to disrupt, to remind. Your love is a rite of passage, and not all who knock on the door are ready to enter. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you sacred. Too many women dilute their light to be chosen, but you are not in search of belonging. You belong to yourself, and in doing so you force the world to rise or release you. There is no middle. The woman he cannot forget is not the one who bent over backwards, lost herself, or waited in the shadows. The woman he cannot forget is the one who became the shadow, a constant reminder of the depth he once touched and could not hold. He will meet others. They may be easier, softer, less demanding, but ease will never replace essence. And you, woman of soul, woman of fire, woman of stillness, are not the echo of someone else's desire. You are the source, the silence before the storm, the whisper before the awakening. Let him live in memory. Let him carry your imprint across years and lovers and lifetimes, because while he wrestles with what could have been, you are becoming what always was. You are not the woman who waits. You are not the woman who explains. You are not the woman who is only valuable when seen. You are the one who remembers, the one who walks away without bitterness, the one who heals, rises, and chooses herself again and again. And one day, when he finally understands what he lost, it will be too late to reach for it, because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.